Marcus Vale had been the keeper of Beacon's End Lighthouse for 7 years, and in all that time he'd grown accustomed to solitude. The automated systems could have run the place without him, but the Terran colonial authority insisted on human oversight for this remote outpost on Meridian Prime. Most nights, he found peace in the rhythmic sweep of the beacon across the churning seas, the distant crash of waves against the rocky shore below serving as nature's lullaby. Tonight was different. The storm had been building for hours, turning the usually docile ocean into a writhing beast of foam and fury. Marcus checked the weather sensors for the 5th time in an hour, noting wind speeds approaching dangerous levels. He was preparing to activate the emergency beacon sequence when something caught his eye through the observation deck's reinforced windows. A figure was moving along the shoreline, stumbling against the wind. At first, Marcus thought it might be debris caught in the gale, but the movement was too deliberate, too purposeful. He grabbed his high-powered scope and focused on the shape below. What he saw made him question his sanity. The figure was humanoid, but clearly not human. Even through the driving rain, he could see patches of skin that glowed with an ethereal, blue-green light, pulsing gently like a heartbeat made visible. Long, flowing hair whipped around a face that seemed almost translucent in the storm's fury. The being moved with grace, despite obvious exhaustion. One arm clutched protectively across what appeared to be an injured torso. Marcus didn't hesitate. He'd spent years in isolation, but his humanitarian instincts remained sharp. He grabbed his emergency beacon, sealed it in a waterproof case, and headed for the lighthouse's lower entrance. The storm nearly knocked him off his feet the moment he stepped outside, but he pressed forward, following the rough path that led down to the shore. By the time he reached the rocky beach, the figure had collapsed near a tide pool, her luminescent skin casting dancing patterns on the wet stones. Up close, she was even more extraordinary. Her features were delicately carved, almost artistic in their perfection, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They were large, expressive, and filled with a depth of emotion that transcended species. Barriers. "Please," she said, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, though he somehow understood her meaning, despite never hearing her language before. "Sanctuary. Just one rotation of your star." Marcus knelt beside her, noting the strange, silvery substance seeping from a wound in her side. Her skin felt warm despite the storm's chill, and up close he could see intricate patterns of bioluminescence, flowing beneath its surface like living tattoos. "You're hurt," he said, knowing she might not understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey his peaceful intent. "Let me help." She studied his face for a long moment, those luminous eyes, seeming to peer into his very soul. Then, with visible effort, she nodded. Marcus carefully helped her to her feet, surprised by how light she seemed, despite her obvious height. Together, they made their way back up the treacherous path to the lighthouse. Inside, Marcus guided her to the main living area, a cozy space filled with books, star charts, and the detritus of a solitary life. She moved with cautious curiosity, her glowing fingertips trailing across surfaces as if reading their history through touch. When she settled onto his worn couch, the patterns beneath her skin pulsed brighter, and Marcus watched in amazement as the wound in her side began to seal itself. "Incredible," he whispered, and she tilted her head at the sound, a gesture so familiar yet alien that it made his heart skip. "Marcus," she said suddenly, and he started. She pointed to herself. "Nixara." He realized she must have picked up his name from his thoughts somehow, a revelation that should have terrified him, but somehow felt natural. "Nixara," he repeated, and the way her luminescence brightened told him he'd pronounced it correctly. She gestured to the storm raging outside, then held up one slender finger. "One night," she said in accented but clear English, apparently learning his language as they spoke. "Then I go." But as Marcus watched her curl up on his couch, her alien beauty casting gentle patterns on his ceiling, he found himself hoping that morning would be a very long time coming. Something told him this was the beginning of something extraordinary, something that would change not just his lonely existence, but perhaps the fate of two worlds. Outside, the storm continued its fury, but inside the lighthouse, an otherworldly peace had settled over the small sanctuary, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Dr. Helena Cross had dedicated her career to xenobiology, but nothing in her academic training had prepared her for the emergency call that dragged her from her laboratory at 3 a.m. The coastal settlements of Meridian Prime were reporting impossible phenomena: sea creatures fleeing the depths, bioluminescent disturbances in the water, and most intriguingly, complete cessation of the deadly kraken, attacks that had plagued the region for months. Helena's research vessel approached beacons, and as dawn painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, through her instruments, she detected unusual energy signatures emanating from the lighthouse itself. When she knocked on Marcus Vale's door, she expected to find a weather-beaten keeper with tall tailies and too much isolation-induced imagination. Instead, she found herself face to face with wonder incarnate. Nyxara stood behind Marcus, her translucent skin still bearing traces of the luminescent patterns Helena had read about in the emergency reports. The alien's presence seemed to make the very air shimmer with possibility. When their eyes met, Helena felt a gentle touch against her consciousness, not invasive but curious, like a butterfly landing on her thoughts. "She's been protecting the settlement," Marcus explained, his voice filled with quiet awe. "Every night. She goes to the water. I followed her once. The things I saw." Through a combination of telepathic images and halting English, Nyxara shared her story. She was Veltari, part of an ancient species that served as guardians of cosmic balance. Her people had discovered this sector months ago, noting the dangerous predators threatening the human colony. But when the Veltari Council ordered her to bond with Zephyron, a warrior chosen for political alliance rather than compatibility, she had refused. "Exile," Nyxara whispered, her bioluminescence dimming with sorrow. "Dishonor to refuse sacred union, but heart chooses different path." Helena's scientific mind raced as she documented everything. Nyxara's abilities were extraordinary. She could communicate with marine life, generate bioelectric fields that repelled predators, and heal both herself and others through some form of cellular manipulation. More importantly, her emotional capacities seemed to transcend species barriers entirely. "The sea demons," Nyxara continued, gesturing toward the ocean. "They flee not from power, but from understanding. I sing to them of deeper waters, safer hunting grounds. No death necessary." Helena was recording everything when her emergency communicator crackled to life. Her blood ran cold at the message. "Dr. Cross, this is General Morrison. We're tracking your location. A Terran Defense Force strike team is en route to your coordinates. You have 20 minutes to evacuate." "They're coming for her," Helena breathed, looking at Nyxara with growing panic. "My reports triggered a military response." Nyxara's luminescence pulsed with understanding rather than fear. She moved to the window, placing her palm against the glass as she gazed at the settlement below. "Small ones," she said softly. "Human. Young. They swim in dangerous waters, yes?" As if summoned by her words, screams echoed from the direction of the harbor. Through Helena's binoculars, they could see a child had fallen from the pier into waters where the kraken were known to hunt. Without hesitation, Nyxara stepped toward the door. "You can't," Marcus protested. "If they see you using your abilities, ... Nyxara turned back with a serene smile that seemed to contain starlight. "Some choices transcend fear," she said, her English growing more fluent with each passing hour. "This is why I stayed. This is why I will always stay. She moved with inhuman speed toward the water, her skin blazing with protective light. Helena watched through her instruments as Nyxara dove into the churning sea, her bioelectric field, creating a safe corridor around the drowning child. The Krakens, rather than attacking, seemed to bow in her presence before disappearing into the depths. As Nyxara emerged with the rescued child, Helena could already hear the approaching military transport. The alien had saved a human life in full view of the settlement, but in doing so, she had revealed herself to forces that might not understand the difference between threat and salvation. Everything changes now, Helena whispered, watching as Nyxara gently returned the child to his grateful parents, her luminescent form impossible to ignore against the morning sky. Captain Tobias Reid had seen enough warfare to know the difference between a threat and a miracle, but his orders were crystal clear. Contain the alien entity at Beacon's End Lighthouse by any means necessary. As his strike team's transport descended toward the coastal settlement, Reid reviewed the mission briefing with growing unease. The reports painted a picture of an unknown alien with dangerous abilities, but what he saw through the transport's viewports told a different story entirely. Below, crowds of colonists had gathered around a luminescent figure who knelt beside a small, wet child. Instead of fear, Reid saw wonder in their faces. Instead of panic, there was something approaching reverence. When his team's sensors detected the alien's bioelectric signature, they also registered something else: the complete absence of hostile marine life within a 2-kilometer radius. Sir, his lieutenant, Barnes, reported through the com. The settlement's emergency services confirmed 0 Kraken attacks in the past 72 hours. Previous average was 3 per day. Reid studied the tactical display with the strategists. Either this alien possessed incredibly sophisticated deception capabilities, or she was genuinely protecting the colony. Neither possibility aligned with his orders to treat her as a hostile entity. The transport landed on the lighthouse's designated pad, and Reid's team deployed with practiced efficiency. As they approached the building, the alien emerged to meet them. Reid had expected something monstrous, but Nyxara moved with the fluid grace of a dancer and regarded his weapons with curious sadness rather than fear. "Please," she said, her voice carrying musical undertones that seemed to resonate in his chest. "No harm comes to guardians. I am Nyxara of the Veltari. I seek only to protect." Reid raised his hand, signaling his team to hold position. Something in her demeanor reminded him of his daughter back on Earth, the same innocent determination he'd seen when she insisted on helping injured animals despite the risk to herself. "You're under orders to come with us," Reid said, his voice gentler than protocol demanded. "There are concerns about your presence here." Nyxara tilted her head, and Reid felt a strange sensation, as if she were reading something written in his thoughts. "You have young," she said suddenly. "A daughter with eyes like yours. She would understand why I cannot abandon those who need protection." Before Reid could respond, alarms began blaring from the settlement below. Through his tactical display, he watched in horror as a massive Kraken, easily 3 times larger than any previously recorded, emerged from the deep waters. It moved with predatory intent toward the harbor, where dozens of fishing vessels were moored. "Barnes, prep the heavy weapons," Reid commanded, but Nyxara was already moving. She sprinted toward the cliff's edge with impossible speed, her skin blazing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living art. Without hesitation, she dove from the rocky precipice into the churning sea below. Reid and his team rushed to the edge, watching through their scopes as Nyxara's light grew brighter beneath the water. The massive Kraken slowed its approach, then stopped entirely. Through the clear waters, they could see her floating before the creature, her hands extended in a gesture that somehow conveyed both greeting and warning. "She's communicating with it," Barnes breathed. "Sir, the bio-readings show she's generating some kind of harmonic frequency." The Kraken, rather than attacking, began to retreat. But as it turned away, Reed's sensors detected something else. A Veltari vessel, sleek and alien, descending through the atmosphere with unmistakable purpose. Nixara emerged from the water, her luminescence now pulsing with what Reed somehow understood was distress. She looked up at the approaching ship, then back at Reed, with eyes that held depths of sorrow. "My people come," she said simply. "They will demand my return. But if I leave ... As if to emphasize her point, multiple Kraken signatures appeared on Reed's tactical display, drawn by the larger creature's retreat. Without Nixara's protective presence, the settlement would be defenseless. Reed found himself at a crossroads that would define not just his career, but potentially the future. Relationship between humanity and an entire alien species. He could follow his orders and hand over a being who had done nothing but protect human lives. Or he could make a choice that honored the oath he'd taken to defend innocent civilians. "Barnes," he said quietly, "send a message to command. Tell them we're dealing with a first contact situation that requires diplomatic intervention, not military action." "Sir, that's not what our orders." "I'm changing our orders?" Reed interrupted, watching as the Veltari ship settled onto the beach below. Sometimes protecting people means protecting those who protect them. Nixara, as bioluminescence brightened, with what might have been gratitude, and Reed felt something he hadn't experienced in years of military service, the certainty that he was doing something truly right. Ambassador Vera Quinn had negotiated treaties between 14 different species during her distinguished career, but she had never faced a situation quite like the one unfolding on Meridian Prime. 3 distinct factions had converged at Beacons, and the human colonial government demanding the aliens' removal, Captain Reed's military unit now acting as unofficial protectors, and a Veltari diplomatic vessel whose intentions remained ominously unclear. Quinn's shuttle touched down between the lighthouse and the beach where the elegant Veltari ship rested like a pearl cast upon dark sand. As she stepped onto the landing pad, she could immediately sense the tension, crackling through the air like static electricity before a storm. The Veltari delegation consisted of 3 beings, each more imposing than Nixara, despite their obvious shared heritage. Their leader, who introduced himself as High Arbiter Kethmol, possessed the same luminescent skin and graceful build, but where Nixara's light was warm and inviting, his pulsed with cold authority. "The exile will return with yous," Kethmol declared without preamble, his English perfect and emotionless. "She has violated the sacred bonds of our people and brought shame upon her lineage. Her punishment has been delayed long enough." Quinn studied his imposing presence, noting how the other Veltari deferred to his every gesture. "With respect, High Arbiter, she has committed no crime under human law, and she appears to be providing valuable services to our colony." "Your laws are irrelevant," Kethmol replied, his luminescence flickering with what might have been irritation. "She is Veltari. She belongs to us." From her position near the lighthouse, Nixara watched the proceedings with obvious distress. Quinn could see the conflict written in every line of her posture, the desire to comply with her people's demands, warring against her evident attachment to the human settlement she had chosen to protect. Dr. Cross approached Quinn with a data pad full of readings. "Ambassador, you need to see this. Nixara's biological scans show neural pathways we've never encountered before. Her brain processes information in ways that suggest she might be capable of computational analyses beyond our current understanding. She could be the key to advances in marine biology, environmental protection, even interspecies communication." Quinn absorbed this information while calculating political ramifications. The colonial government wanted the alien removed to avoid diplomatic incidents. The Veltari demanded her return for what sounded like punishment. But the growing crowd of human colonists, including the parents of the child Nyx-Ara had saved, were becoming increasingly vocal in their support for her remaining. High Arbiter, Quinn began carefully, what if we could propose an alternative arrangement? A cultural exchange program where Nyx-Ara could serve as a bridge between our peoples? Kethmo's response was swift and final. Impossible. She defied the bonding ritual with Zephron. Such defiance undermines the very structure of our society. She must face the consequences. What consequences? Quinn pressed dot for the first time. Uncertainty flickered across the High Arbiter's luminous features. Permanent exile from Veltari space. Severing of all biological and spiritual connections to our collective consciousness. In your terms, complete isolation from everything that makes her what she is. Quinn felt a chill run down her spine. She looked at Nyx-Ara, who had obviously heard every word. The alien's bioluminescence was dimming, not with sadness, but with resignation. There is another way, Nyx-Ara said quietly, stepping forward. Her voice carried across the assembled groups with startling clarity. I invoke the right of voluntary dissolution. The effect on the Veltari was immediate and dramatic. Kethmo's luminescence flared bright enough to be visible even in daylight, while his companions stepped back as if she had struck them. You cannot, Kethmo whispered. The right has not been invoked in 3 millennia. But it exists, Nyx-Ara continued, her voice growing stronger. I choose to sever my connections willingly, to become something new, not Veltari, not human, but a bridge between worlds. Quinn realized she was witnessing something unprecedented, an alien choosing to sacrifice her very identity for the sake of protecting another species. The political implications were staggering, but more importantly, the moral weight of the moment was undeniable. If she invokes this right, Quinn asked Kethmo, would your people accept her decision? The High Arbiter was silent for a long moment, his luminescence cycling through colors Quinn had never seen before. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with something that might have been grief. If she truly chooses dissolution, we cannot prevent. But she will be forever lost to us, and we ... We will be diminished by her absence. Nyx-Ara stepped toward the ocean, her arms spread wide as if embracing the entire colony. And let me be the first of a new kind, she declared. Let me be the proof that love can transcend the boundaries we create for ourselves. Quinn realized that this moment would be remembered in the diplomatic records of both species. A choice that would echo across the stars, proving that sometimes the greatest treaties are written not in words, but in the courage to choose connection over convention. Professor Jasper Thorne adjusted his recording equipment as he gazed out at the transformed landscape surrounding Beacon's End Lighthouse. 1 year had passed since the extraordinary events that had changed not just Meridian Prime, but the entire trajectory of human-alien relations. As the newly appointed Director of Interspecies Studies, he had come to document the remarkable society that had grown around one being's decision to choose love over law. The lighthouse itself had been converted into something unprecedented, a sanctuary for interspecies cooperation that attracted visitors from across the galaxy. Where once Marcus Vale had lived in solitude, now dozens of researchers, diplomats, and beings from 7 different species worked together in the expanded facility that spiraled up from the original structure, like a metallic flower reaching toward the stars. Thorne found Nyx-Ara where he usually did at this hour, standing at the edge of the bioluminescent gardens she had cultivated along the coastline. The transformation she had undergone through the rite of voluntary dissolution was both subtle and profound. Her original Veltari features remained, but her bioluminescence, had evolved into something entirely new, patterns that seemed to incorporate elements from every species she had encountered, creating a living tapestry of interstellar connection. "Professor," she greeted him, her voice now carrying harmonics from multiple languages. "The evening meditation begins soon. Will you join us?" Thorn nodded, following her toward the amphitheater that had been carved into the clifftop. As they walked, he marveled again at the changes her presence had wrought. The marine ecosystem had stabilized completely, with former predator species now serving as guardians of the colony. The Veltari, initially devastated by her choice, had gradually begun sending cultural ambassadors to study what they called the Nixara phenomenon. The evening meditation was unlike anything in Thorn's extensive experience. Representatives from human colonies, Veltari vessels, Draknari trade ships, and species whose names he was still learning to pronounce, all gathered in concentric circles around Nixara. As she began to emit her unique harmonic frequencies, Thorn felt the familiar sensation of barriers dissolving between different forms of consciousness. "In the beginning," she said, her words somehow reaching each being in their native language, "we believed separation was strength. We built walls between peoples, between worlds, between ways of thinking. But tonight, as every night, we prove that connection is the true path to understanding." Dr. Helena Cross, now the sanctuary's chief xenobiologist, caught Thorn's eye. From across the circle, her research had revealed that Nixara's transformation had unlocked dormant genetic potentials in her DNA, allowing her to serve as a living translator not just of languages, but of entire modes of being. She had become something unprecedented, a bridge consciousness capable of facilitating understanding between radically different forms of life. Captain Reed, who had retired from military service to become the sanctuary's security coordinator, participated in the meditation with the same discipline he had once brought to warfare. His daughter had visited last month, and Thorn had watched with amusement as the teenager immediately bonded with Nixara over what she called the coolest light show in the galaxy. As the meditation deepened, Thorn felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of individual thought. For these precious minutes, all barriers dissolved. Human anxiety about the future merged with Veltari longing for spiritual connection, Draknari curiosity about new forms of beauty, and the vast, patient wisdom of the ancient Kurthek, whose ships had begun arriving just last week. When the session ended, Thorn remained in contemplative silence as the diverse gathering slowly dispersed. Some participants lingered to discuss insights that had emerged during the shared consciousness experience, while others simply sat in comfortable silence, processing the profound sense of unity they had experienced. "She comes," Nixara said suddenly, her luminescence shifting to patterns Thorn had learned to associate with anticipation and joy. "Who comes?" he asked. Nixara pointed toward the evening sky, where a new star had appeared, growing brighter as it approached. "Another exile," she said softly. "Another who has chosen love over law, connection over convention. The first, but not the last." As Thorn watched the approaching vessel, he realized he was witnessing the birth of something entirely new in galactic history, a movement that transcended species boundaries, built around the radical idea that beings could choose their own identity based on love rather than the circumstances of their birth. The sanctuary was no longer just a refuge for one remarkable alien. It was becoming the first settlement of a new kind of civilization, one where identity was chosen rather than imposed, where diversity was celebrated rather than feared, and where the bonds between beings were forged through understanding rather than conquest. Thorn began to record his observations, knowing that future historians would mark this moment as the beginning of the interstellar consciousness movement, the philosophical revolution that would reshape relationships between all known species. And at its center, forever and always, would be the being who had dared to believe that one night of sanctuary could become an eternal covenant of hope.